22nd, he became the leader. He was 53 years old. After the U.S. entered the war against Japan, Ho believed that getting American help was essential to Vietnam's future independence. When an American pilot was shot down in North Vietnam, he was brought all the way back to his base in China by Ho.
And you got to try to imagine this guy. He's wearing sandals and shorts. He's got this wispy beard, and he looks like, you know, he weighs about 85 pounds, and he looks like he'd be blown over with a feather.
Ho offered his services to the commanding officer, General Claire Chennault of the legendary Flying Tigers. Chennault declined the offer, but the Office of Strategic Service, or OSS, America's wartime intelligence service, was interested. They believed that Ho could help them rescue downed pilots, and more important, furnish intelligence information on the Japanese. Ho was accompanied back to his base by an OSS officer, giving credence to his claim that the U.S. was his ally. When the OSS began supplying radios, weapons, and training, it helped establish Ho's Viet Minh as the preeminent Vietnamese nationalist organization. But once again, Ho's life was in jeopardy.
Ho took to his bed and really seemed very sick, so we sent in a paramedic. And indeed, his report, as best I can remember, was saying, this cadaverous old bag of bones is why he's living, I don't know. But he opened his kit and fed him every antibiotic he had, and Ho recovered.
Ho greatly appreciated the Americans, and he impressed all of them. He not only spoke and wrote in English, but he seemed to understand their culture, too. He had also acquired a very American habit.
He liked to smoke American cigarettes, Philip Morris in particular. But he always carried in his front pocket Vietnamese packets of Vietnamese cigarettes. And then those are the ones that he will offer to the guests.
In August of 1945, 2 atomic bombs brought the war to a rapid conclusion. When Japan surrendered, there was really no one in control of Vietnam. Ho moved quickly into the gap. With General Vo Nguyen Giap leading his guerrilla forces, they took control of the north.
That must have been an electrifying experience for the masses, and they must have felt that this was the moment.
On September 2nd, 1945, nearly 500,000 people attended a huge rally in Hanoi. Ho gave an independence speech that began with the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
He quoted directly from Declaration of Independence, and maybe what he was doing was flattering United States so that they could be on his side. He was disarming his opponents by saying that he was not going for Marxist revolution, he was only going for plain, simple independence for his country.
He'd admit to being a communist. He said, you know, my purpose is to free up Indochina. I'm not doing anything different than you did in 1776. You managed to deal with it pretty well, and that's all I'm trying to do now. Do you have any problem with that?
Ho had no illusions about the tenuous nature of Vietnamese independence. In perfect English, he wrote a letter to his OSS contacts stating, "The war is won, but we small and subject countries have no share, or very, very small share, in the victory of freedom and democracy. Probably, if we want to get a sufficient share, we have still to fight." Ho went to Paris in 1946 in hopes of working out a compromise where Vietnam could become autonomous within the French Commonwealth.
I think Ho Chi Minh was trying to postpone the inevitability of armed conflict with France, because I think he was under no illusion that the French would give up without a fight.
Ho's mission to Paris failed. Back in Vietnam, conditions were even worse than they had been before World War II. The French army returned and brutalized the country. As many as 2 million Vietnamese starved to death during a famine, while rice was exported to France. Ho appealed to the U.S. for mediation, but never even received a reply. The emerging Cold War between the Soviet Union and America made France's participation in the defense of Western Europe critical to the U.S. The French agreed to cooperate with the Americans, but the U.S. had to keep out of France's colonial affairs.
Ho Chi Minh was meeting with a rather sympathetic French official. He said to him something that is very, very important, that the French didn't understand at the time, and which also becomes important later for the United States. He says, if we go to war, we're going to lose 10 men for every one that you lose. But in the end, we'll win and you'll lose.
By the end of 1946, Ho, General Giap, and the Viet Minh were back in the jungle fighting a guerrilla war against the French. Initially, it seemed unlikely that the Viet Minh would have any hope in defeating the French. But by 1954, the French were desperate to end the bloody guerrilla war that seemed to have no end in sight. The French decided to spring a trap for the Viet Minh at a place called Dien Bien Phu. They believed that the ensuing battle would end the Indochina War. It did end the war, but in a way they could never have imagined. In March of 1954, the French army believed that they had lured Ho Chi Minh's forces into a trap near a remote outpost called Dien Bien Phu. Unfortunately for the French, they only trapped themselves. The battle cost the French over 15,000 casualties. It also cost them Indochina. The Viet Minh victory over the French marked the first time that a European power had been defeated in battle by its